Okay, hallelujah. Thank you, Abba, one more time for bringing us together, for guiding us in thy word, for clarifying thy instructions. We pray, Abba, and praise thee for all thou gives us to be a continuance for us, for thou art our provider, our healer, and our cover always. We thank thee and we praise thee, Behashem Yahushua. Amen.
Amen. So here we are. This is the 11th of November of 2023. And there's some talk, there has been talk, there probably always will be, about things happening to stop or eliminate or remove, perhaps, things on the internet. So just so you know, somebody was talking about shutting down the whole internet as of the 15th, which would be a couple days from now. I'm not buying into that whole mentality. It's a threat. It's a warning. It's a okay. Get your stuff in order, or back up on your computer, whatever you're going to back up. And then there's also talks of an impending confrontation, let's say, between the superpowers. Somebody blasting us with a EMP, which is to say, fry all the electronics, melt everything down. So if that's the case, anything you have backed up on your computer is going to be melted and you have no access, which means all these videos that we've been making and trying to store here or there so that people would have them, they could vaporize. So this whole study is not something which is like, boy, I got a whole catalog. I think there's close to 700 hours of this eriktology, paleo Hebrew study now on the internet. 700 hours of stuff. Well, some people have watched it, some more than once, but it has to become the truth of whatever's there. You have to have in your own mind or your own being, or else it's worthless. And you may have a catalog, but I mean, we had catalogs of things on VHS tape, and then VHS tape is obsolete. Put it on CD. Well, then those things are obsolete. Those technologies change. I remember my grandfather way back when, probably the 1940s, had recordings on a wire, and he would send us quarter-inch reel-to-reel tape recordings. Gone. So today we're going to pick up and carry on from Ezekiel 38, which we were talking about last week, Gog and Magog. And the idea is, well, I talked about the end of last week, the meaning of the word Gog, or at least as best as I could determine the meaning of the word Gog. How do you do that? Or is that even valid? I don't recall, as I said, I don't recall anybody else. I don't remember hearing anybody else ever discuss the matter. So I don't know whether other linguists, other theologians have said, oh, no, this is what Gog means and Magog, what it means. And whoever comes up with something else is just some, what you might call harebrained nonsense or whatever. I don't know. But so this whole particular study of saying, here's these Hebrew words. What does it say? What does it mean? But then what do we do with that? Or what are we supposed to hear in that? Or which is to say, how do you interpret that? And there might be different levels or different ways of interpretation. So I was going to go over a couple things today to talk about that, specifically dealing with Ezekiel 38. So at the tail end of last week, because I still haven't got these notes sent off, but I have this thing written up here. If you look at the spelling of the word and its derivatives, so you got Bet Mem Gimel Vav Gimel is Be Ma Gog. Why is it Bemagog instead of Magog? Well, bet is a prefix, means in, on, with, among, through, or against. So if he says, I'm against Magog, well, Magog, mem is a prefix letter also, which can mean the place of, or from there you move, so that's where you're from, or it can also mean I'm away from that, I'm against that, I'm opposed to that. Well, the letter bet as a prefix can also mean against or opposed. For example, it says Ishmael's hand would be in the hand of his brothers. Well, it doesn't say in the hand, it says bet yod dalet, be yod. And it's translated against hand. Esau as well, against the hand of his brother. There's another verse that I was looking at here, Ezekiel 39:1, which is the verse we're going to zero in on, and it says, Ayin Lamed hyphen Gimel Vav Gimel. Well, there, Ayin Lamed, which is a yoke, it's translated against. And Ezekiel 39:1, Ve'ata ben Adam ha neva al Gog ve'amerta ka amer adna Yahweh. So all that thing is a whole setup, that whole for, and you, son of Adam, the prophecy or prophesy al Gog, against Gog, or concerning, prophecy concerning, doesn't mean against necessarily, yoked with Gog. Amer with a tav suffix is make this declaration, ka amer, so declares Adonai Yahweh. Hineni, that's behold. So here's the thing. Aleph Lamed Yod Kaf. Aleka, Gog. Nun Shin Yod Aleph. Nashia. Rosh Meshach Vetubal, or Tabal. Well, it's translated, if you look in Stone's Tanakh here. Now you, son of man, prophesy against Gog. Say, thus says Adonai Yahweh, behold, I am against you, Gog, the prince, leader of Meshach and Tubal. I will lead you astray and seduce you. I will cause you to ascend from the uttermost north and bring you upon the mountains of Israel. So this here in chapter 39 is the beginning of where we have, okay, Gog, as we read in 38, gets this idea to invade Israel. And here in 39, it actually says off in the margin, it says the second war of Gog and Magog. So wait a minute, that looks like it's reading what's going to happen on account of the invasion of the first war. So the publishers, or whoever put these notations in the margin here of this publication, the Stone's Tanakh, I don't know whether they're accurate. There's two wars between Gog and Magog. Then there's the one in Revelation. Is that a third? That happens like at the end of the world's history, like Revelation 21, 22, after the devil gets taken out of the bottomless pit where he'd been bound for 1,000 years. He gets let loose and he inspires this another invasion against the land of Israel, which has been sitting, you might say, at peace and just thriving with life. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, let's come wreck it all. So is there three conflicts? I don't know. Maybe they're all the same one. Maybe we got the timing off. Maybe there's just two. My point is, we read right here, and this is Stone's Tanakh. And you could say, well, the guys who wrote this, from what I understand, Stone's Tanakh printed in the late 80s, 1980s, 88 or 89, I think, something like that. Anyway, somebody put together a translation. They got a bunch of different sects of Judaism, who otherwise might disagree with each other's interpretation or theology, but they all agreed that, okay, this is good enough. This is pretty good, this translation. The Hebrew is all, from what I understand, is genuine, and they all agree on that, but the English translation, that's up for grabs, but they all agree to disagree, or agree well enough that they say, look, let's go with that. King James English, on the other hand, in 1611, King James used some of, I think the guy's name was William Tyndale. He had translated the Bible from, it was either German or maybe Latin into English, which was an illegal criminal act. It was cost him his life to put scripture into English. It was against the law. So they killed him. But then King James used his writings, or hired people that used his writings to come up with the King James translation, which is regarded as the most sacred, most correct translation up until these days. I happen to disagree with a bunch of it, but what do I know? My point is, how do we know what this really says? So the whole idea about Gog, and what I had written down here, which I talked a little bit last week, you look up in the dictionary. So Gog is Gimel, Vav, Gimel. And as we've talked all these years, yods and vavs in between the other letters are kind of like wildcards. It doesn't really change anything, but it just enhances or directs the consideration to be like a verb tense, or there's half a dozen, I don't even know what you call them. You'll see in the dictionary hith and pith, and it's like will run, have been running, he's the guy doing it. It's like all these different grammatical syntax things, and it's like I can't even keep them all straight. In front of the dictionary tell you what they are, but it's like I basically ignore those and just say I'm just looking for the root verb essence of any word. But if you look in the derivatives, especially in Klein's dictionary, he'll tell you what those things are, and a lot of times he'll tell you related languages, similar words, similar spelling, whether it's Arabic or Akkadian or Sumeritic or wherever, and he kind of validates, look at even the other languages take this word or the similar vowel pronunciations or consonant pronunciations and say, look, we call the same thing this. And the whole study of the etymological dictionary is to say, oh, I get it. I see how they're doing this. Even though it's not necessarily the literal translation. So in looking with Gog, Gimel, Vav, Gimel, I've also noted numerous times where you take in Hebrew, if you take they say there's a 3-letter verb root, standard, typical consideration for the whole Semitic language group, 3-letter verb root. But if you take a 2-letter word and you multiply the second letter and make it the third, like mem gimel or mem gimel gimel, it's still the same word, changes a little bit, but you can still see the essence of the 2-letter into the 3. And then quite often they'll take, like, say, mem gimel, or mem gimel vav gimel, or mem gimel yod gimel, or mem yod gimel. It's sticking the yods and vavs in, it's taking the second letter and duplicating it again. Or sometimes even mem vav gimel. They'll take the same root word of 2 or 3 letters and they'll repeat it. That's the way they build the language. So you look at those kind of derivatives, and then if mem is a prefix, put in the other prefixes. So if you look up in the dictionary, under hey gimel or yod gimel, you could even look at bet gimel. So when you have a list of the prefixes, just you got to go through the dictionary. I prefer the paper copy rather than online, just personal preference, but just sit there and start flipping through the dictionary, and you put every prefix letter. The tav could be a lamed, could be a nun or a mem, and just look up, is there a gimel? Well, what if you stick a vav or a yod and then the gimel? Just look for it. It takes time, but one of the benefits of doing that is that as you're looking for the word you're hunting for, your eye catches other things, and it's like, oh, hey, look at that. Oh, hey, look at this here. And especially if the closer you get to the word, you'll see things that it's like, wow, it sticks in your mind. And I find it to be really helpful for enhancing your understanding of the language and the way things are structured. You really notice how the language is built. Like when I was a kid, they had these things called Tinker Toys. What are those? They're just stuff you just start sticks and round like wheels with holes in them, and you stick the sticks in there and you just build stuff. The language works the same way. Couple basic elements. You've got the 22 consonants, 2 or 4 or 5 could be considered vowels, like the Alef and the Ayin. They're not vowels. They could be considered vowels. Yod and the Vav, okay. The idea that they're not vowels, or they could be, or the only vowels that exist are the dots and lines they put under the letters. Those are rules that somebody made up years after the language was being used, and that's just not necessarily the way that even King David was speaking. Nobody really knows. It's all conjecture and study. Anyway, so I looked at mem gimel, mem gimel, mem gimel gimel, mem vav gimel, mem gimel hey, hey gimel gimel, hey gimel hey, hey gimel yod kaf, hey gimel yod vav nun, mem gimel yod hey, mem gimel mem hey, mem gimel nun, mem gimel mem gimel mem, mem gimel mem mem, hey gimel Tav, Gimel Aleph Vav Hey, Gimel Vav Vav Nun, Gimel Gimel, Gimel Bet Bet, Nun Gimel Hey, Nun Gimel Nun, Shin Vav Gimel Gimel, Shin Gimel Hey. Well, there's one oddball. It's the Gimel Bet Bet. Why would I do that? Because Gimel Gimel means roof or vaulted. Well, so does Gimel Bet Bet. So it's a synonym. So it's like using the deck of playing cards to play the Crazy 8 game. You're trying to match either the suit or the number value of the card. It's you flip one over, then it's your turn, and you have to try to match one or the other. So I could choose to match spelling, or I could match meaning. And one of the things I've done over the years with different dictionaries that I've had is when I'm trying to figure out what these things mean, and I come across a word with a certain definition, it's like, wait a minute, that's the same as this other one. I'll write it in the margin. It's like having a thesaurus. One of these days, I wanted to modify Klein's dictionary and have a whole thing set up as a thesaurus, and haven't done that yet. But the point is, by trying to match meaning or remember the meaning, it just helps you try to see how the language is built and why. Why should Gimel Bet Bet be a synonym with Gimel Gimel? Well, Bet Bet, like Aviv, Aleph Bet Yod Bet, Abib, like the month of springtime. Well, that's when the barley is ready to harvest. Well, no, it's the month of springtime. Well, yeah, but that's when the barley is. Well, is it about the barley? Is it about the equinox? What's it about? Well, what's Aleph Bet Bet or Aleph Bet Yod Bet? So you look it up in the dictionary and you see Bet Bet means gateway or entrance. Okay. Aleph Bet means father. So if is Aleph Bet Bet the entrance to the father's what? Out in Montana, on ranches, they'll have at the entrance to the driveway of the estate, they'll have two like big tree trunks and then one horizontal over the top, like in making some kind of an arch. In fact, it kind of looks like a Shinto arch. It's from Japan. Well, why do they do that? It's just architectural graphics? Maybe. Looks like the letter Het, not the modern Het. Modern Het only has the two verticals, and then it comes up and bends over and projects out one side. I've drawn it on purpose so it projects out the other side also, just to get your mind to realize that letter Het, which is you might say a fenced compound like somebody's estate, can be drawn like that to look like one of these Montana arches, or you might find them in Wyoming, but Montana especially, or a Shinto arch. So what does that mean? Well, it's a bet bet. It's a Het, but it's also a bet bet or a bet Yod bet. So Het bet bet. Here's this estate, this compound, and this is the gateway or the entrance to the. Well, that word is pronounced Chababa, and it means one who's dear to my heart, in my bosom, within me. So my heart, my affections, my mind is the Het. And I have willingly allowed entrance with interest. So the bet is my disposition. Chabab. And like back in the class of 2011, the eriktology class, I was saying it's like saying, hey, baby. It's like, hey, baby, hababa. Why would somebody say, hey, baby? Well, in English, it's like it's a term of affection, of endearment. And it's like, well, that sounds like it comes from the Hebrew. I can't prove it does, but it sounds like it does. Chababa, because that's where my affections are. So I choose to believe that, hey, baby, is this English derivative of chababa coming right from Hebrew. So in my mind, I'm just going to believe that. And if anybody else likes it or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just that way I can remember the language. It makes sense to me. Gimel bet, if I look it up in the dictionary, it means vault. Well, what's a vault? Well, if you make a vaulted ceiling in a house, you don't have a flat lid in the room. It goes up to the rafters. So you've got this volume of space in a room, a vaulted ceiling. Well, gimel means roof, pail, or bucket. What's a bucket got to do with a roof? If you take a bucket and you turn it upside down, now you've got a vaulted space, which is the same thing as a pail. So it's talking about the volume of space if you turn it upside down. Well, if you have an open pen with no roof, when it rains, it comes in, gets hot in the sun. So you build a roof. Well, that's an increased expense and an increase of value. There's another word, I can't remember what it is offhand, which means a covered deck on a boat. Well, if you have an open boat, a fishing boat, like we see pictures on the Sea of Galilee, all the fishermen are there and they pull in the nets, you can work. But it's an increase in value to have what they call a hold on a ship, where you have a roof where you laid a deck and where somebody can go underneath and they're out of the open air. I forget what that word is, but see, it's the same as this kind of a word. So does this mean the roof itself? Does it mean the concept that there's a roof put on something? And does that have something to do with a bucket, or is it the vaulted space? So if I look at the synonym of gimel with gimel bet, not only does it mean vault, but it means to gather or collect. Hey, that's what you do in a bucket. You pick up a bucket and you pick up trash, or you go pick apples, or you throw some corn in there and go feed your chickens from the bucket, from the pail. It's the use of it, but it also means loquacious. Loquacious, loquacious. What does that mean? A lot of words. Somebody who uses a lot of words, kind of like this study, or the study about words, we could call it a loquacious study. Well, that's gimel. Bet. The entrance of the compound of gimmeling, the bet gateway or entrance to the estate of the gimel stuff. The gimel stuff. What do you mean gimel stuff? Well, you got Alef, bet, gimel. So there's an interesting story. Dr. Seuss, back when I was pretty young, he wrote the book called The Cat in the Hat, Thing A and Thing B. But then there's another story called The Cat in the Hat Comes Back. And you get a cat that sneaks in the house and it gets in the tub and it gets a ring of cat junk, stuck grease or whatever, stuck to the tub, and then they got to clean it up, and then it keeps getting smeared here and there and everywhere. And so the cat in the hat says, I need some help to clean this up. And he takes off his hat, and a big tall hat, and under his hat there's another cat with a tall hat. Well, that's cat A. And then that cat pulls off his hat, and there's a cat B and a cat C, all the way through the alphabet. Okay, so that's cute. It's Dr. Seuss's way of helping little children learn the alphabet. Well, there's something else going on there. I've talked about this before with trying to understand the Hebrew alphabet. So here's this concept, which is perfectly pictured in Dr. Seuss's The Cat in the Hat Came Back story, meaning If Aleph is where it's just the beginning, it's all a certain unity of oneness. So that word would be achad, which is spelled Aleph, Het, Dalet, achad. There's a similar word called yichad, which is Yod, Het, Dalet, which isn't one unity, but it's unified together. And it says that the 12 tribes working as a union, working as a confederacy, are Yod, Het, Dalet, Yichad. It's different than the Aleph. It's essentially the same type of a thing. So if Yahusha says he and his father are one, that word one is Aleph, Het, Dalet, not Yod, Het, Dalet. So there's something going on, but they're not one, they're two. Well, Bet is the number two. If everything was one, if everything was Aleph, you couldn't even identify it as Aleph, because in order to look at something and identify it, you have to say this is the observed and this is the observer. Means you had to need to be other, either an other person, an other mind, other eyes, or an other space. Even if you were to say, well, I don't have to be in other space, I can be in the midst of singularity, how would you know if everything was the same, if everything was singular? Well, I'm within it. No, within is a reference of compared to being without. Well, Bet literally means in or out. It's a location, in, on, with, among, through. You can only have those terms if you have a perspective of otherness compared to the original. So as you contemplate even the prefix and suffix uses of the letters, the meaning of the letters, and you try to wrap your mind around it, you'll see that the language is built this way. And for somebody to say, letters don't mean anything, it's like, well, perhaps they don't mean anything to you. Perhaps they don't and haven't meant anything to scientists and linguistic authorities for centuries. It doesn't mean there's nothing in them. So the question is, what can we see that's in these letters? So if I try to look at the synonym words, like gimel gimel and gimel bet bet, they both mean vaulted. The roof is like an upside down bucket. So that, what do you put in a bucket? You gather stuff, and gimel bet bet means to gather, collect, and not just objects, but words, to gather words. What's that got to do with gimel? Well, if Aleph is all one and suddenly it invents or creates or allows for otherness, that otherness might be in conflict. So I've heard it said years ago that the Jews or somebody who studies the ancient language says, well, the Bet is the devil. The devil? I thought it was supposed to be father and son, husband and wife. What do you mean the devil? It's opposition. It's something that's not Aleph, not Echad. So by definition, Bet is this otherness. Well, okay, let's go back to the cat and hat. The Aleph is just is. First person, present tense, identity, intent. It's just all about me type of thing. There is no other. There's no other anything. There's no other time. There's no other space. There's no other reference of a different voice, a different contrary, nothing. Well, soon as there's an other, a Bet, suddenly there's a difference. Now the question is, how close is the other to the one? Is it the same? Is it two aspects of oneness? Or is it an other, and how much distance? Arm's reach? A mile away? 10,000 years away? Suddenly it sets up a proximity reference. That's Gimel. So if Bet is the notion of otherness, Gimel, it has to do with defining something about the disparity between the Aleph and the Bet. It's this distance conceptually, time or space. Well, those are just two dimensions. There's being or not being, that's a dimension. Then there's the space, that's another dimension. Then there's time, that's another dimension. So Gimel, third letter in order, references something about the Bet in proximity to the Aleph. So if the Aleph was like the cat with the one hat and he takes it off and hey, there's a bet. The bet takes off his hat and there's Gimel. Well, if Gimel has to do with the dynamics between the Aleph and the bet, then, and I've talked about this once a long time ago, just trying to clarify this notion. I could see the alphabetic order in sequence, Aleph, then bet, then Gimel. If Aleph is first person and bet is second person, if Aleph is consciousness or being and bet is a body, a noun, an object, a house, materialization, cosmos, Gimel being camel, well, that's an object, but it's verb action. Camel walks back and forth. A house is just there built. If the house is a body, a Gimel could be the body allowed motion. And whether the motion was emotion, which is an inner disposition, or whether it was a physical put wheels on the house and push it down the road, to allow for a road of trajectory of distance of movement in a certain orientation, that's gimmeling. But the fact that there could be a choice of orientation of where you're gimmeling, that sets up dalet, door, choice, option. And then to say, well, which one should I choose? Let me give you a suggestion. That's hey. And you go, okay, thank you. Now I'm going to make the determination. That's vav, which is a connection. And then Zion is a disconnection. So there in the first 7 letters, it sets up this whole way of thinking. And one throws you into the next and throws you in the next. And I say that because you can't even say one Aleph if there's only Aleph. It's unidentifiable. You have to have an other to look back at the first and say, that's the first, that's the one, because that's a label. And if bet means object, place, position, identifiable with a label, then for me to label Aleph is putting it into a bet motif, bet sense. So if the only way to identify Aleph is from a bet perspective, and the only way do I really identify bet is to tell its proximity to Aleph, which is a Gimel perspective, and the only way to tell what the Gimel perspective is to say it's an option of choosing, well, that's the Dalet perspective. So the way the alphabet logically is built, constructed, is that as soon as you identify one letter, it throws you into the next. So it's like, well, could somebody then, Elohim in the very beginning, sit there one day and thinking, okay, I'm the Aleph. Now I'm going to make another. I'm going to make a bet. Okay, then what? Why don't we have a fire? A fire? Well, that's Sheen. That's number 21. No, once you have an Aleph and you have a bet, the next thing to come up with is, well, what's going on between Aleph and bet? The fact that there is a between, is a nexus, is a connection between Aleph and bet is the necessary demand of attention, of identification, of description. That's Gimel. So soon as you have Aleph and bet, you don't know what's the difference between them. The Gimel is the thing that describes the difference. Well, why am I going on about this? Is because what I'm saying is that if you start studying the language, it'll pick you up and throw you. And it's almost like in Aleph's hat is the bet, but in Bet's hat is all the other letters. But he opens up his hat, the cat in the hat story. And there's the Gimel, and in his hat is the next one, and his hat is the next one. And it's like, so each letter carries all the other letters, but Gimel doesn't necessarily carry bet. Bet carries Gimel, Gimel carries Dalet, bet carries Gimel and Dalet. But so it's like, well, it's an interesting, almost like a valve in a pipe, a one-way valve that'll allow the water to flow through, but then the water can't, it's a backflow valve, it won't allow it to come back. That's kind of the way the alphabet's set up. If you do plumbing, you can recognize this to go, oh yeah, or software programming, somebody who doesn't have anything to do with that may find that a little more difficult to realize. But what I'm saying is the more things that we experience in life, we'll look back at the alphabet and say, yeah, hey, just like that, it's in there. How about that? It's in there. And then I can see the alphabet working in a circle, and that's more the study. And so some of the things I've talked about here over the years or what is trying to highlight very specific parts. And so I did this one study a few years back where I tried to intentionally run every how do you wrap your mind around the meaning of the letters if you have Aleph pushes you into Bet, Bet pushes you into Gimel, Gimel pushes you into Dalet, run that way all the way through. But then to say, there's this concept, what if Gimel describes the relationship between Aleph and Bet? Then Dalet describes the relationship between Gimel and Bet. And Hey describes the relationship between Gimel and Dalet. Is that possible? Is that true? And I tried to run that whole thing out and write it down and document it. And somebody could say, you're wrong, it doesn't work that way. Well, I figured out that it did work that way, or at least it worked that way in my own imagination. Then the issue, the trouble becomes how you describe it in a way that sounds logical and reasonable and that works. But it works. Or at least I can make it work. Well, if I can make it work, does that mean I'm making it up, or does that mean I'm changing my perspective where I can see it? There's a thing called the magic eye posters. Back in the late 70s, I think it was, early 80s, somebody with a computer program, it looks like wallpaper. It's like, what am I looking at? Just repeated pattern on a page of paper. Well, you defocus your eyes, or you refocus them. Instead of being on the paper surface, you focus your eyes about 3-4 feet behind the paper, and it takes some exercise to be able to do that. But as soon as you do, all of a sudden, the image on the paper takes on like this three-dimensional look, which they put there on purpose. And some people can do it and some people can't. Some people can see it easily and some people can struggle. And then all of a sudden it'll come into view, and other people you just can't see it, just won't come into view. And you go, I think I see something. No, when you see it, bam, it's there. And I've tried to equate the understanding of this language like that magic eye. I don't know who invented it, or maybe a bunch of people have used it. I don't know. But especially back before there was computers, and all you had was print books. You could buy a poster or buy a book, and each page was a different one of these pictures. I don't know about the computer, but you have to focus your eyes. And I've been able to do that looking at a tapestry of, say, woven cloth, just to exercise this change of focus of your eyeballs. You can stare at something as if it was 3 or 4 feet back, and the colors change and the texture changes. It's really interesting. It's just an eyeball brain thing. But anyway, what I'm saying is, can you do that with the letters? So I can look at this word spelled Nun Gimel Nun and say, well, it means to play a musical instrument. It's like, what has Nun Gimel Nun got to do with Gog? As we've discussed, if you double the letter and make it, instead of Gimel, you make it Gimel Gimel or Gimel Vav Gimel or Gimel Yod Gimel, it's all Gimel stuff. What's Gimel stuff? Got to go back to the original alphabet. Gimel stuff describes the relationship between Aleph and Bet. Or in a sequence, it's the verb action of the noun Bet, which is employed by the Aleph agent. I need to move this rock over there, but it's too big to move. What am I going to do? I invent a tool, a lever, and I get it, and then I take the lever and I press down and I roll the rock from here and move it over there. The wheel, the lever, and the inclined plane, the three first primary engineering inventions, you might say, of civilization, as so we're told. Why would you need a lever? It's an incredible invention of moving something, of how do you Gimel that Bet? Invent a tool. Invent a tool. Well, the tool's a Bet. The rock you're trying to move is a Bet. The situation that you can identify, the rock's in the way, I'm turning a problem into a Bet thing that I can now get outside and analyze and look at. So as I'm trying to contemplate life on Earth as Adam, I bump into a bunch of circumstances. Gee, it's cold. How am I going to get some heat? Gee, it's hot. How am I going to cool down? I'm hungry. Where do I find food? All these are circumstances that he gave us. I'm disturbed and frustrated mentally. He invented every possible mental spin, whether we call it crazy or demented or incredible genius or frustration or passion. He invented every possible emotion. He knows the full gamut of the playground, you might say. So I could say, there's no sick, twisted human emotion. There's nothing I'm doing wrong. I'm experiencing one of the things he gave us to experience. Now, he did say in the Garden of Eden, do not eat that fruit. But other than that, they could do anything. Yeah, but what if they had illegal thoughts? Like what? There was nothing illegal. Well, how did the illegal stuff come about? Now we're told about the Watchers and the Book of Enoch and fallen angels and blah, blah, blah. And say, well, those bad angels, they came down and they put thoughts in people's head that should not have been there. It's like, but Elohim designed the human mind. And every possible thought we could have, he knows, because he's built us to have those thoughts. Now we're told in the New Testament, hey, listen, you can choose to have certain thoughts and not have other thoughts. Don't even think about some of this stuff, but consciously, intentionally think about these thoughts. Why? Because if you do, his Ruach will be with you. You'll have a peace about you. You'll be able to think more clearly or perhaps logically if you value logic. He told us then, don't have certain thoughts. What do you mean? That's right. You can proactively choose to not have certain thoughts. Like what? Well, go to Joshua chapter 1. He said, do not tav yod resh aleph, tirah. Well, that's translated to be it fear. Do not fear. He also said, do not tav het tav. What does that mean? It's translated about be shaken or intimidated. Then there's another word similar to fear, spelled different. It's ayin resh tav or something. Anyway, if we look at these words and say, don't even think about being afraid like something's going to get you. Well, then why do we tell children scary bedtime stories or sit around the campfire and ah ha ha, made you afraid? Then you hear something go bump in the night and you hear growls and voices, and there's stuff to be afraid of. I know somebody that when they were 16, they went to Africa and they said, well, everybody in the tent should sleep with their heads towards the center, your feet towards the outside, but that way when a lion comes, instead of grabbing you by the head, he grabs you by the feet, and you might be able to get what? When a lion comes, oh yeah, they heard him walking around the tent at night. Well, I mean, there's some real stuff to be afraid of, or to be wary of, or to be. But if you are afraid, and he tells us not to be afraid, what happens when you're afraid? Well, you have certain thoughts and certain emotions, and it puts out certain chemicals. I've heard it said wolves can smell fear, and that attracts them. It's like, so what if that was the way it worked? What if the way it worked, the way he built the universe, was that if you have certain thoughts, if you have certain feelings or emotions, it sends out, let's say they're like invisible radio signals, communications. If you feel or think a certain way, it projects communication. Well, to project a communication is a gimmeling. If you have a feeling, is that betting? I mean, if you yourself, the Alef self person, have a body, that's bet. But what about a feeling, a thought, an emotion, a fear, an anxiety, a desperation? Is that a bet? If you could label it, you could say it's a bet. But if he says, look, do not allow yourself to have these certain feelings. And it's like, I've heard or I've seen it, let's say I've seen it in movies, where somebody's looking for somebody else. Say you're in a war situation, or somebody's a bad guy's looking for somebody who's trying to hide. And if you're the one hiding and you're looking through a crack and you can see the bad guy, there he is, but he can't see me because you're hiding behind this crack. Well, I've heard people say that they can feel somebody looking at them. How's that even possible? If your eyeball is a receiver, light comes in, hits your retina, interprets it into some kind of, say, an electrical signal, goes to your brain, it turns it into a thing that we call an image of, I see this. Well, then how can somebody feel themselves being looked at? Well, then you've got this quantum physics thing of the double slit experiment. If you observe the experiment, it changes the way the photons of light shot through these two slits hit the target field behind it. Okay, we're not going to observe it. We'll set up a camera. If you watch it through the camera, it'll change the effect. That's what they found. That's this quantum physics, quantum entanglement concept. Well, then they said, well, what if we don't turn on the camera until after it's gone through this slit, but before it hits the target background, then we'll turn on the camera and look. Well, then even though it goes through the slit as if it was say a bullet, once it goes through and you start looking at it, then it changes into a wave instead of a bullet, as it were. And it's like, and then it goes back and changes, it reverses its effect in time. So if you observe, and this is one of the most famous experiments of quantum physics consideration, is that if you observe something, it can actually change what happened moments ago in time. It can go in reverse time and have an effect. How is that possible? It's not logical, but is it what Elohim built? So here's the question. If that's really the way it works, and he tells us, do not fear, is fear projected, gimmeled out from our being, our betness, as something that can be felt, sensed, determined by some other being, whether it's an animal, a wolf, or whether it's somebody else feeling that they're being looked at? Is that even true? And if it is true, then is Yahuwah telling us, if you're my people, not only do you need to behave a certain way, which is to say, believe this and don't do that, but do these things, don't believe those things, don't even talk about those things, don't talk about the Elohim Akrim, don't even let their names come out of your mouth. And I've been reprimanded for talking about JC, the J-Man, the Jesus Christ character. Don't even mention his name. It's like, wait a minute. I spent 50 years learning about this. And if I hear a voice on the radio and the guy says, this is what it means to believe in that guy, then I have to listen to that and go, yeah, I know, I believe that. I've heard that for 10,000 times. And all of a sudden, now that I'm reading the Torah, I'm going, wait a minute. There's something that's incompatible. Me studying the Torah is now, I see, in conflict with something I've heard my whole life. And I have to be able to stop and look. And then there's a scripture, a Bible verse, where Elohim says, come, let us reason together. What the heck is reasoning? Reasoning is looking at what you got and figuring it out, calculating it as an observer, looking at every aspect. If you study mathematics or chemistry or philosophy or physics, you got to be able to look at the situation and wrap your mind around it in all possible ways to see from a different vantage point. You've got to bet that Alef to know what you've got, what you're supposed to have, and what you're doing. He's given us to do that. Now, if I go on about it, if I say, okay, now I'm going to herald, hey, look, and go on about this other thing that's not correct, it's not true, that's not what I'm supposed to believe in, fantasize about it, run with all, it's like, wait a minute, at a certain point, I'm supposed to stop. And I know some people say, don't even mention the names of the days of the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, oh, you're mentioning all these. Elohim Achrim, these gods of others, literally are carried in the names of the days of the week and the days of the month, or the meaning of the names of the month. So I know some people say, listen, I'm going to so regard the instruction to not mention those things. I'm going to call them first day, second day, third day, but I'm not going to say Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm not going to say it. It's like, okay, great. I know what you mean, and I know why, and I can applaud that. But if I'm trying to communicate, question is there some kind of allowance? Well, certain people don't want to have a conversation with me if I do that. Okay, but I find it difficult to hear people, but I'm not against it, to hear people talk the other way, to use a bunch of Hebrew words. And it's like, oh, boy, it's just jarring, but that's a good thing. And it's like, wow, boy, how do we make these transitions? What I'm saying here is, for me to try to figure out what I should say or not say, how I can investigate the search, the study, looking at this core from every possible angle, that's gimmeling. To try to then choose the door of, with all my research, gimmeling, of what is bet, what is with, what is against Elohim, if I project him as the Aleph, then I'm saying the whole thing that I'm doing is I'm saying he's the ultimate Elohim Aleph. He made me a self-individual Aleph, Adam, with a bet, with a being, a body in a time and space, that now I have to somehow relate to him. And that's my gimmeling. How do I relate to him? And whether it's Gimel or Gimel Vav Gimel, and then if I know that noon is this lightning bolt action, whether it's prefix or suffix, I can look at this word nagan, noon Gimel noon, and though it means to play a musical instrument, it's all about engaging the gimmeling as my event. Well, if I'm engaging, if I'm doing the gimmeling as my event, and it's picking up a musical instrument and putting something to music, what is that? It's an expression. Is it a description? Is it creating an environment, a space, an ideal space where I can think clearly, play a certain type of music at a certain type of rhythm with certain type of instruments? And now I'm constructing a zone where I can meditate, ponder, think. Well, that's Haggah, Hey Gimel Hey. So I can noon Gimel noon in order to Hey Gimel Hey. But the whole thing is Gimel Gimel, or Gimel Vav Gimel, which is a place of gimmeling, which is Mem Gimel Vav Gimel Magog. But if I'm against a certain way of doing that, that's also Mem Gimel Gimel. Okay, so here, what I'm trying to say is just set up this whole thing just using ABC, the first three letters, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and say it's a question of my relationship between me, the Bet, and Elohim, the Aleph. That's the ultimate Gimel, but it can be between any two people, between any two nations, between an agreement or conflict between my Ruach and Elohim's Ruach. That's a Gimel. And he designed the dynamics and the parameters of every possible thought of that engagement. I'm sitting here finding myself all of a sudden, I exist. What am I doing? Am I a human on the face of the earth? No, you're a steel ball inside a pinball game. Why does something keep smacking me and you hear bells going off and flights? What's happening? I'm suddenly a steel ball inside a pinball machine. How did this happen? Well, it was just, that's the way you were invented. You were created to be a steel ball in a pinball machine. Whoa, who knew? What am I supposed to do? Just get beat up and move around and really? Well, no, I happen to be an atom on the face of the earth. Kind of feels like a steel ball and pinball machine sometimes, but no, this is what I am. That's that. This is me. Okay, but see, if we just find ourselves alive and hey, we're having these experiences, we got to then identify what the heck is going on. That act of identifying what's going on within what context of what reality, how did I get here? What is this? Where's it all pointing? That's all gimmeling. And then throwing it back into the alphabetic sequence, I can say, well, then the next letter is a Dalet. I have a choice about something, and then there's, hey, incoming information. I suggest you choose life. What? Choose life, quick, choose life. Oh, yeah. Life. It's like, if that's the all that I have, choose life or choose death. Boom, it's either one or the other. Choose life. That's the Vav, that's connecting. Zion, is that the option, death, or is that what's coming? I'm just saying there's all these different ways to read the Aleph Bet. Now, because of that, we're going to look real quick at this next hour, because we're right up against the time here. We're going to look at this verse that I read of Ezekiel 39:1, the next phrase where it says, behold, Aleph Lamed Yod Kaf, Gog, Gimel Vav Gimel. And then there's this phrase, Nun Shin Yod Aleph, Resh Aleph Shin, Mem Shin Kaf, Vav Tav Bet Lamed. And again, it's translated, behold, I'm against you, Gog. I'm against you, Aleph Lamed Yod Kaf. Remember, we've been titling all these talks as Aleph Lamed Yod Hey, translated Elijah. Aleph Lamed Yod is I will, this is mine. And here the Kaf suffix means you. The Hey suffix means reveal. I'm going to talk about my stuff, which is why we're keeping this series going. But this is similar but different. It's kind of like I will me, I will mine. That's like me. But the Kaf suffix is you. So this is like me and you. It's all about me and you, which is the Gimel stuff. Gog, the next word. So it's almost like, is the word Aleph Lamed Yod Kaf explaining what Gimel Vav Gimel, my gimmeling connected with your gimmeling? It's, remember hearing about way back in the, American West, they got these cowboys and Indians, the pioneers and the savages, or the invaders of the inhabitants. And you capture one of those other guys and they, hey, I'm going to show how tough I am. And you tie one of their hands together and they each got a knife in their other hand. It's like, okay, it's like, what? Well, that's kind of like Gimel Vav Gimel. A guy with a knife and the other guy with a knife, and each of their one hands are tied. And it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to pull the guy to you? You're going to punch? I mean, it's like, tough fight. Gimel Vav Gimel, is that what that is? Me and you? Aleph Lamed Yod Kaf? What do these words mean? Nasiya Rash Meshach Tubal. The prince, the head of Meshach and Tubal. Is that what it means? We're going to look at that in a minute. We're time to take a break, though. Carly, you got the button? Hello? We're at the 1 hour mark. Is anybody there? Should I hit the button? Hello?
I'm here, but I don't know if I should hit the button or not. Let's see.
Go ahead.
Why don't you hit the button, Eric? Go ahead and hit the button.
Me? Okay, I'll hit it.
Yeah, you hit the button.